Hey, Jace.
Hey, sorry about making everybody wait. That wasn't my intention. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I'd have enough time with 2 minutes, and that isn't enough time, I guess.
It happens. It's late for all of us, I know, and I get it, man.
Yeah, well, it's probably my fault too, because I'm like, life is just busy. But I'm glad we're here meeting. It's nice to hang out with somebody in the Midwest.
Like most people I meet with are Eastern time's not so bad, but a lot of people are on the West Coast and or even other countries. Jace and I are both from the Midwest, and we don't often get to meet with those people.
It's true. I'm just pulling up my developer instance. So,
Okay,
do you want to like kind of lead us off, like what we're talking about today? I think if you kind of level set expectations, it'll make this a better event for everybody.
absolutely. And there is something I want to monologue a little bit too, just because I think there might be a lack of knowledge or information out there on certain aspects of the SDK that I think we should get through before we jump in. But welcome, everyone. My name's Chris Nanda. We have Jace Benson on the line as well. We are here today specifically to talk about the SDK from ServiceNow, which is not the CLI, which came out a number of years ago, which is very focused on now experience components. And then prior to that, there was even some other initial CLI stuff and whatnot. This is the SDK, which came out around Washington, D.C., and with specifically when ECMAScript modules were added to the platform. We're not going to dive excessively deep today into trying to build out whole applications necessarily, but I think one of the things we want to do is identify what's happening when we do certain things, why these things are happening, and how I can actually see what's going on so I can build my apps. Because we know how to build them in that platform, right? Usually.
Normally, right? Most
Normally.
people. I mean, if you don't, we figure it out.
That same thing, if you're used to building it in the platform, figuring it out through TypeScript or JavaScript in Node.js and all of this stuff, it's figuring out a whole different beast. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, did you want to add anything before I monologue for just a couple more minutes?
Yeah, let me just real
Yeah.
quick level set with a few other things. So I know it's not the now CLI, but I just want to talk through I need to vent for like 2 minutes. Getting it set
Go right
up was
ahead.
such a pain in the neck, especially on Windows, because you go to install it based on whatever's in GitHub, and it's like, okay, cool. And then you go to run it, it's like, oh, you're running the old version, but I wasn't. And then I spent like a half an hour figuring out that, in fact, I don't have anything in my NPM cache after I have Node and NPM installed. And my Node version is proper. I didn't install, like I have NPM, so I can flip around whatever version I need to, right? But then you go to run it, it's like, would you like to upgrade to version 4? I'm like, I am on version 4. And then you have to manually change your packages to use version 4. Like, this is not a good experience to get started up with. I know you're
No,
just a
no.
big advocate of it or fan of it. So I just want to open up with just like, and then I get into it. I want to see the value. So I'm excited
Absolutely.
that you're here, Chris. And I'm excited that you're excited about it because maybe you can tell me what I'm missing.
Well, and here's the thing. I advocate pretty highly for scoped applications, for the SDK, for all of this stuff. My background before I started in ServiceNow was in software engineering. And so I did C Sharp for a number of years. I started off in C++, did Java when I was at ServiceNow. And so when I started on the platform, I noticed a severe backpedaling in a development capacity. Having to paste code or write code in a script include, at least the editor has been somewhat updated, but still it's this little window. And if I do expand the window in the form view, it goes back to small when I save and all of this stuff. It always drove me nuts, especially when at the same time I actually started doing Salesforce development and writing Apex and all of this. And they had a built-in plugin from the get-go for Eclipse back in the day. You know, you had to have certain like unit tests to be able to push to a production org and all of that stuff. And so like it felt like there was a lot missing, but the platform focused on solutions versus developers. And it is what it is. So it's really, to me, it's been nice having this kind of turnover in the past couple of years, moving towards a developer focused environment. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if you want to be a low code, no code developer, I 100% support you on that. That is not what I'm talking about though. So I just want to be strict on that, that we're focusing on, if you want to be on it, kind of a pro code development. And even in the docs, it kind of says pro code, I think something like that, when it talks about the ServiceNow IDE and whatnot. So number one, I'm going to put out a video after this specifically for Windows setup, because I will tell you, I've always had issues with Node.js and Windows in any kind of configuration, whether it's this SDK or other React apps and things like that. I'm not saying it can't be done. It absolutely can. I've always had issues with it. That's why actually you see me here. I spun up a Linux VM just because I enjoy it better. It's easier for me, and it's pretty simple overall. Number two, and this is the bigger one, I want to dive a little bit into what happens with the SDK as a whole and with Fluent, because I think there's some misconceptions here. I'm going to switch over here real quick. This one. I haven't played with these too much, so Bryce, you're going to get to watch me struggle on this one a little bit. I did ask them to kind of watch and get our feedback and things like that. I've been working pretty close with their team, and they've been amazing at fixing bugs and fixing things and making updates to make our lives a little bit easier. When I initialized this project, it was one of the React apps that they've put into the version 4 of the SDK. And so basically you can build a React app locally, just like you normally would. It builds and then it pushes up, and basically you have a single page app that's part of a UI page. So it's nice for certain things, like if you want to build a dashboard or whatnot. But what I want to focus on right now is what the heck happens when I'm doing this, because Fluent right here. So if I look at this table definition,
In my mind, I immediately put this into like, this is like a glue file. You're gluing effectively other code snippets to this file to make it whole.
You can, but this one's not.
Yeah, okay. This one is
so we will touch on that absolutely. But what I want to focus on here is that Fluent never goes to ServiceNow.
Right.
Okay. So this is a big thing that it took me a minute to figure this out, but ultimately Fluent is a TypeScript adjacent, TypeScript based, TypeScript extension. I'm not really sure what the terminology is, but domain specific language for ServiceNow, which just means that it is adjacent to TypeScript. So that way you can explain or build ServiceNow components in a format that is type checked, which is really nice. When you do a build, it's going to check these files and say, hey, are the columns correct? Are the fields correct? Do you have those correct types and things like that? You can override them, which I'll talk about later. Ultimately, then, this just gets built into the same old XML that you're used to. Worst comes to worst, if you're worried and you're trying to figure something out. So right now, we've got this React app, and I'm like, well, how do I build a UI page in this, and what's it going to output to? Well, I can work backwards and forwards if I want. So I'm going to go ahead and build this real quick. Hopefully this works. And so I already did my npmi, which is the npm install. So that is a key aspect of any Node.js. That it's not SDK specific, but basically when your project gets created, you start off with this package JSON, the now config, and all this other stuff. But this node modules right here did not exist when I first created this project. When I did an npmi or npm install, that's when it creates this node modules. It creates a package lock, which just says, hey, where am I getting all that stuff from? I don't want to get too deep into Node.js stuff though. So it did build successfully. So now you can see it generated this dist folder. I can look at everything it output. So I can look at my app, and we can see here, this is, if I went to sysdictionary or sysdb object and exported my XML, or if you looked at some of the old code, you would see this exact same thing, right? The problem with that is, though, there was never any guarantee with what order any of this stuff was in. So if you stored stuff in Git and then made updates, your code comparison would be all over the place many times. Or you'd have date changes, things like that, of last time something was updated and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why Fluent is nice, because it omits a lot of that and does it on the back end for you. So now, like, if I make changes to this table, I can commit that to Git and compare that over time. But even cooler, I mean, I can see my static files. So this is interesting to me because I haven't really looked at these yet. But main.jsdbx, and JSDBX map. So if anyone's not familiar, JSDBX, literally, if you create a client, not a syscript client, but the other one, so UI script. Sorry, it's been a little while since I've done UI stuff. If you create a UI script and it's not set for global, then it doesn't really do anything just sitting there. But you can access it via the URL by typing in the name.jsdbx. And so my guess is, and again, haven't dove deep into it yet, that's how a lot of the React stuff is done in the UI pages. So it's just loaded up as UI scripts and then loaded in this way. But we'll actually see this in just a minute once I push this to the instance.
Right.
But
I'm actually very curious about this because
yeah,
I've been building apps outside of ServiceNow for fun to learn other stuff. And ServiceNow is catching up, right? They're doing a good job catching up. It's unclear to me how I'm supposed to build this stuff. I looked at this project, the React project, and I am still confused about it a little bit, but we'll get into it.
I will fully admit, I'm going to be learning some of that side of it with you. The server stuff and the Fluent side, I've done quite a bit of. The client stuff, not so much yet.
Webpack or some sort of packing tool to like combine it into this ES build maybe.
Well, you saw that I had your app up, right? So my goal here was to try and copy some of that stuff over into here and see if we could build some of the components. Now you built yours in 11D, so
well, it's just nunchucks, so it's JavaScript.
And then even from here, though, you can even come down here and that's odd.
What's that?
Something changed.
Oh, the package JSON changed?
Well, I'm going to have to ask my friends at some point. I'm not going to ask on the call, but this used to build into a target file, and I loved it because you could actually it'd create the dist directory, and then it would also create a target directory with the zip file that actually gets pushed to ServiceNow in it. And you could unzip that and see the entire package that it's pushing to ServiceNow in order to be installed, which was really cool because it was also a way to compare. Because if, just as an aside, if anyone's not aware, what we're doing here when we build these apps, this is the same thing that happens when you publish a scoped app within ServiceNow and it gets installed into another instance. So this format that you have right here under app, this is basically this gets zipped up, and when you do a publish, it gets moved.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Just to clarify for you, Chris, pack was disconnected from build, so it's a separate command.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to give people a little more control. So if you run
pack separately,
you'll get the zip file.
So run pack.
So now SDK pack.
Yeah. The first thing I do immediately so far, and all these things I'm messing with, is I add two scripts, one called push and one called pull, and it combines them so I don't have to think about it.
Okay. So there, now it built the target. So you can open that containing folder, unzip it. And it's the same thing we were looking at in dist, basically, except it might be a little bit different because we had some static files there. So we've got UX lib assets. Oh, that's interesting. So that's a new type, I think, or newer type. And then we've got our UI page, our number for our table, our module.
The links on the left. Yep.
So there's ways of looking at, like, when you actually publish an app from one instance to another, like to my company repositories, there's actually a way to see that published zip file, and it looks exactly the same. I'll write up something on that and put it out. So I just wanted to start off with that, though, because I think that, with Fluent, like, it can get really confusing sometimes. Like, what am I doing? Why am I writing it? Where is it going? Now, I need to caveat what I said earlier about it never goes to ServiceNow, because there's one exception to that if you're using the IDE. So and this is where I'm actually going to jump to, because I'm going to suggest you, Jace, and anyone else who's getting into this, play around with the IDE first if you want to learn the SDK, then move to local so you don't have to worry about all the setup. You can install the ServiceNow IDE on a PDI. I've got it on this one.
Oh, it's because the IDE is separate than the new studio as well.
It is.
Which is very confusing. But yeah, I hear you.
So you can think of like low code or no code, low code, pro code, and there's now a studio or a place to do each.
Well, there's another one though, because you got like the low code stuff, which is where ServiceNow and SDK on the developer instances. Like, you land on one of those two pages. Then you got this old school studio, which they don't use anymore. And then you got the new school studio, which is like the new place, which I wouldn't say is low code.
IDE is very
If
specific.
this places you stop, that would be like, that's the order of it, right? There's not.
It is, but I would say that like you've got your integration hub or flow designer or whatever stuff is called now. Stuff changes names too much. I'm not going to relearn it. Then you've got your studios here, but then I would actually say IDE and local are like way over here, but very close together because you can do the same things. But IDE is cool in a couple of reasons. I don't use it personally on my day-to-day work for reasons we can talk about later. It has nothing to do with functionality, usability, or anything like that. But if I come in here, it'll take me to this, and I can create a workspace just like I can in VS Code. I just created this one for this Fluent discussion, so I'm going to use it, but you can create a new workspace right here just as easily.
Right. For some reason, I thought the studio was like the new studio.
And here's the thing, like everything you're trying to do here, I'm going to create a new one. For some reason, this is...
Right. And everything.
I'm trying Pop OS now, and it's just been funky. But anyway, I guess my workspace did open, so here we go. But I can create a new app from here. This is actually where I created. It might be having issues because I have it open already. And it's going to ask me all this stuff, and then it asks me the same thing you saw in the SDK, what type of app. I oftentimes, personally, will just do an empty app just because it's what I started off with back in the day. But I oftentimes will end up being either the TypeScript basic application or the full stack incident response React. This is what I just created that we saw, and it will go through and you'll notice it's doing everything we were just seeing in VS Code. Now, the cool thing about this is it's both connected and disconnected from the instance itself, meaning that, again, none of the Fluent is actually touching the instance, but if I have my app selected in the instance, it will auto update within the IDE, my Fluent.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there's triggers between the two. So, but you do then, it'll make updates from the instance back over to, whoops, don't randomly click like I do, back into the IDE. But then you have to run, in a minute, you'll see down here, there's going to be a button to build and install. So this is the exact same thing. This is literally VS Code in the browser that they rebuilt.
Yeah, it's the Monaco editor with the whole VS Code outer frame of it, which is not a small feat.
No, I was really impressed by this. And the usability and everything, and they've added so many new things. And we do still have source control here. And just as a heads up, my reason before is my day-to-day, I am working on a local Git repository that I don't want to have to set up med servers for all the time. So that's why I don't use this IDE. Otherwise, I would love to. Otherwise, the source control, I've got it connected. That other app, I've already got it connected to GitHub, and all of that. Just like, and I was actually this same app that I've got that I just had open that we were just looking at. This is actually I created it using the IDE, and then I just pushed it to GitHub and then pulled it local. Now, I could have created it local. I just, like you found, there's some issues setting up locally. And when I run an NPM or a Now SDK, and it usually works when I'm not on Windows. There's some weird stuff there. But I just find it easier to go into the instance and create my app.
Especially if you don't necessarily know all the types of the ServiceNow TypeScript adjacent.
Exactly.
Like, you don't necessarily know that a UI page has this attribute in camel case or in snake case or whatever it happens to be. I think they're pretty consistent, but I haven't gone through all of them.
Exactly. So now one of the cool things here that we can see, and this is what you had mentioned earlier, where like it's a, what did you call it? Like a scaffold or
I called it like a glue file because it's like, oh, this is a thing that attaches all of the real code.
Well, and this is something they added in the past couple versions, in past two major versions. And I absolutely love it because previously, like right here, you would see this is a UI page. I would have all my UI page code it would look kind of like this.
Well, this is interesting that they're referencing it directly with an import though, because normally they do that now include.
Well, that's new too. I have not seen this before. I think it's very cool to be able to see that as an import / client. So basically everyone who's looking at this and like, what the heck is going on? They've defined the UI page, your normal XML stuff that we always see. But right here in that HTML field, instead of putting that stuff in line, well, if it was in line, it would, again, going back to, I want to be able to compare and track my changes over time. It would be hard to do this as like a big text string, right? Because otherwise, even if it was multi-line, it's just a big text file. And so this way, they're able to import it from another file. So this client index.html, if I come up here.
Edwin has his hand up. I'm not sure if he's a ServiceNow.
Oh, he
person.
is. And there we go. I intentionally didn't give you guys access because I didn't want you to feel called out. But go ahead, Edwin.
No, I'm happy to answer. The reason why that has just to clarify, now include Jace is a glorified copy paste. That's all it is. Whereas this is actually an entry point for the rollup plugin that does more than just copy pasting. So we didn't want to conflate the two. And now include is something that works bidirectionally. So if you go from Fluent to the instance, and then let's say I have a script include where I'm using now include to host a different JavaScript file, which is kind of nice, right? Having that. If I change it on the platform and I sync back the code, it'll change it inside the JavaScript file, which is really cool.
That is really cool.
In this case, at line number 3 right there, if you go touch the generated sort of like index JSDBX file, it's not going to bidirectionally sync back. This is one of the few things in the SDK, similar to modules, that is a one-way street by design, because it's more complicated and you're sort of not meant to really touch that metadata directly. So just making that distinction, we decided to just kind of do something a little more different to set them apart.
So just so I can repeat back, can you pull up that file, Nanda?
Absolutely.
So this incident page that you're importing here, Edwin,
Yep.
It's a one-way pull. We're not able to pull, but that's the HTML, that's not the JavaScript.
Correct.
That's not the JSDBX.
This index.html, think about it as like your app. Yeah, exactly. It's like your app entry point for a React app. You're familiar with that. So
yeah,
but we do a lot of processing to some more complicated files like you saw in Chris's dist folder.
Oh, I see. So
right. So it's a one-way street. Because there's just no way of like decomposing it back. Right. It's meant to be like a true kind of binary. Think about it like, hey, it's generating binaries. Whereas like a script include, that's totally human editable on the platform, right? So that's why we don't use now include. It's more than just a glorified copy paste. It's an actual kind of entry point for something more complicated, and it's one way.
And that's why you guys aren't including the scripts here, because they're being included differently. You're building the whole thing in the HTML and having to build it with that.
Right. Now,
and if Nanda changed like the title on the index HTML file, that would be fine. But you definitely don't want to touch the generated components, which totally makes sense.
And if you do use now include for your HTML, that's totally possible too. That'll just work as a glorified copy paste. You see what I'm saying? So you still have the benefit of like, hey, I don't want to use React. I just want a UI page and I want to dump my own HTML in there. You can still do it.
Last week I published a few kind of tools because like I like to host my own stuff because I'm very distrustful of people holding things online forever for me to use. And so if I host it myself or whatever, I know it's not going to go away. So I built an app to track like minutes in a meeting. And it's just a single page app. There's no back end to it, literally just HTML and JavaScript. But I was using the JavaScript and modules, but it's not React. Would I import this the same way there? And would ServiceNow interpret it properly as long as it's a traditional HTML application?
It's still going to go through the whole process. I want to say yes, it'll work. Because at the end of the day, we're literally just hydrating everything to the rollup plugin. If you don't have the entry points for other things, it shouldn't really matter. But I'd have to confirm that. But you could do now include, like I said, at that point, if it's really just an HTML page.
Right, but now include though, because it gets weird. Because you can't do the imports, or at least I found you couldn't do the imports in the same way.
Yeah, it'll work.
Cool.
So sorry,
I didn't realize that was the trick, that import was doing magic stuff, because that's not normally how I would think of import, because import isn't a magic thing.
As per Rick, who's one of the creators of all this framework stuff for the UI pages, he said the only thing we care about is relative paths to JS files. from script tags and style tags. That's sort of like the entry point we feed into the whole rollup system. So yes, it should work.
And these examples that were included, can you only have one of these pages per app because of how the rollup stuff is happening?
No,
With
not
all
at
the
all.
examples, it just shows one.
No,
Okay, cool.
You should be able to set up like another UI page, and if you want to recreate this and point it to another entry point, at the end of the day, you're just going to get more of these files in a different multiple entry points. Basically, that's it. Totally valid.
Yeah, I haven't tried that out, but the first thing I saw when I saw this React thing was, oh, cool. So I need to make an app for each page. That's awesome.
Well, that
But
reminds me of the CLI, because the CLI, at least originally, you had to create one app per component.
The previous CLI, right? Not our CLI, but
Not the SDK.
The now CLI. Yeah.
So the Now CLI that was created to build custom Seismic or Now Experience components, it was one component per app.
Yeah. Here, not really. It's just a UI page and a bunch of UI like style, CSS DBX and JS DBX JS. So yeah, it's kind of like pretty flexible when it comes to that.
That's awesome.
Sorry, Chris. Just want to make sure I clear that up for people.
No, that's good information. And I think this is a really good starting point, Jace, for what it seems like you're looking for, like for your Minutes app. It's kind of interesting that they are doing the Now Table API, because you easily could then extend this. And you know what? I don't feel like doing this in Fluent though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my instance, because this is what I was talking about. And you can do this. It's easier with the IDE because everything will just kind of work. There we go.
Machine.
And my virtual machine is being funky, but you can do work in the instance and then pull that local using the SDK locally. But the nice thing with the instance is I don't have to worry about that, right? Or with the IDE, I don't have to deal with that.
Transform.
Exactly.
It makes you lazy.
It does. It does. And why is this so slow? I've got like 10 gigs of RAM dedicated to this thing. So test new React app.
I've got a Linux laptop right here. If you want me to move over there, but you've got everything up, so I'm going to leave you run it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two of them sitting next to me. My desktop here has 64 gigs of RAM, so I figured. But yeah, so what I can do now is I'm going to go ahead and come on. Okay, I don't think this is my VM.
So far we've kind of covered like the install has its problems, but you can do the same thing in ServiceNow with the IDE locally as its own app, which is separate from Studio. Additionally, the React and the Vue and those components that get built for those examples, they build to a UI page, and UI pages uses traditional fetches, which have been rewritten. It's not native fetch. It's the ServiceNow rewritten version of fetch that's compliant with fetch so that it works. But they're using the GCK token I saw in that code snippet you had to get the stuff. And now it looks like you're building on ServiceNow and you're going to have it pull back into the IDE, I'm guessing.
That's exactly right. Just because there's some stuff that I just find easier sometimes to initially write. Here, I'll just do this one.
When there's a whole bunch of records that get made. If it's a client-side script include, you got the script include, you got the access control, you got the role that's appended to the access control.
It depends. I will say for me, I tend to do my script include still on the locally when I'm building just in Fluent now, but that's script includes that's usually how I do it. But there are tons of different things like scripted REST APIs and whatnot. Sometimes, again, even tables, because of the fact that
it's those tertiary artifacts that I get nervous about.
Yes,
because it's like
so
I would know the script include record. That's easy. That's one record. But would I remember to make a sysuser role? Would I remember to attach the sysuser role to the ACL, right, to the access control record? I don't know that I would.
But the nice thing is, though, then, like after I create this scripted REST API, well, now that I have all of that stuff, it's easy for me just to copy and paste in the IDE. So now if I want to add here, it's all there. I thought there was a trigger to refresh that.
Yeah, I think you missed it. It was on the bottom right of your screen, but there's like a timeout. There was an action that said, hey, there's changes in the instance. You want to sync them? But it's like a disappearing notification.
Okay, so here. It used to be automatic, right? When this first came out?
Yeah, but most people didn't actually like that.
I didn't either. I just didn't realize that. So that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if anyone else is doing this and you're wondering why it's not syncing, or you missed the notification like I did, you can always look at the little notification bell down here.
So
and it'll
when
pop up.
when it syncs, is it literally just running now SDK transform, or is it
Yes,
doing
sir.
something different?
Nope. That's basically it.
Okay. So if you want to
Set.
play on hard mode, just whenever you make a change in the instance, run now SDK transform.
That's fair.
Right? Because I'm
Did we
assuming you can just
actually-
open a new terminal down there at the bottom, though it doesn't look like you can.
Except it didn't actually do it. Oh, there. It just took a minute. So now I've got my sysws definition.
Right.
And the nice thing is, one of the nice things, there is what's called the record API, which you can create any record within ServiceNow. So like this object right here, there's one called record, which is just a generic record. It's got a schema that you can just give whatever fields happen to be on that table in it. But the ServiceNow team has been adding additional types into here. And so now there's this one that's REST API. So up until, even 3.0, you had 2 files here. And so I'd have my REST API definition and then the REST message function definition below it. But now it's just the REST API here and my routes, which is really nice.
Yeah, that is nice that they make it one blue thing, even though it's multiple actual records in ServiceNow.
They're
And
working on it. That is one of the big things they're working on, especially for all the AI stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been hearing a lot about that. The other thing that I've been really psyched about is ATF tests, because that is a huge cluster when you're trying to deal with it and source control it and all that stuff. But now it is just super simple. I've been building them nonstop. I'm actually having Cursor build them most of the time, my Jasmine tests, and they work pretty well. But anyway, so now I've got my API here, and I can actually just then copy that into my service, right? So like if you're building your Minutes app, then you could add those things and then add your scripted REST API to here, and then it's all kind of together.
Right.
We've kind of gone into a lot of the stuff that I was talking about. Now, I know we glossed over, and I kind of am doing that intentionally because there's not a whole lot I can do about it at the moment with the Windows stuff and setting up SDK locally and all of that. I'm going to play around with it and record me playing around and failing and all of that stuff, because I even had issues when I started setting it up on my desktop here. I want to just see, if you run into this, do this. If you run into that, do that kind of thing. But now that we're into this, what would you like to see next? Like, what do you want to see
Me?
work? Yeah, you.
So like I was just trying to get it so I could load up that application. So I mean,
Okay.
if it's really gonna import that stuff that way with rollup, right? So
Okay.
in the site, there's if you run npm run build on the command line in your editor there, .js.pro is a subdomain of one of my websites. And if you go there, it's just a single page application to track minutes in a meeting, right? Make it kind of easy. So if you run, I think npm run build, I might have looked at the packages JSON. That'd be a different command. Oh, there it goes. But it'll
Yeah,
build a
I didn't
site.
do end first.
Ah, I see. There should be an underscore site that gets built.
Okay.
Right. So here you have the index.html. Right. So if we just look at, and you can see I have everything kind of separated out into smaller parts. Because I was like,
Okay.
well, if I'm going to do the import, I want to really use the import. What's a small app I have that has not too many functions? Right.
Okay. All right,
So
well,
I
let's
thought,
see.
well, let's see if we can just bring this in. But it doesn't work exactly the right way when I did it. So I don't know if we want to make like a new UI page and leave the existing one work. Right?
Well,
Because it's not React.
it's
But
not.
I don't know if that now UX globals matters for that stuff.
That is a good question. This is the app itself. So main is grabbing app. Okay. So it shouldn't, I don't think. Here, let's just try.
Well, I think you're going to have to import whatever combined JSX file like it's getting made, because the main TSX is getting what's rolled. But it's kind of like there's magic here with React and how it's getting built. Because rollup kind of does magic stuff.
That's right. It's also building React.
Right, which is why I'm saying like I don't know if that's going to be simple, and maybe it's something I have to play with later because I didn't do it in React.
That's
React has a lot of stuff as well, which is a whole nother learning curve, right? So you got like four things you're learning here, right? You got your front end libraries if you don't know them. You got all the now SDK stuff, and then if you're not used to using Linux, you have Linux on top of all that stuff. So yeah, I totally agree. The IDE is probably the best place for most people to start if they want to get into this. Instead, the IDE in browser application and not locally.
Well, I'm going to throw this out a little bit too, because Bryce is actually the one who maintains, or from one of my knowledge, maintains a lot of the ServiceNow SDK templates and the code that's on GitHub. It would be awesome to see some examples of just like, as we said, I love React. React is great, but at the same time, something a little bit where I can just plug something in simple, because like these files actually get built into their own set of dists, right? Like just like 11D was just doing.
Right.
And so
Yeah. Like a simpler boilerplate.
I'm interested to know if I could import 11D into here actually.
11D is just another node package. It's not a very complicated static site generator. And their build commands are also not very complicated. And they output to a specific folder with that entry point. So it may just work if we set up those things appropriately. But the question is, how do you set them up exactly appropriately? Because I don't see any React build steps in any of the code in here, which puts in my mind to magic because it's not clear what it's doing. But I'm sure if I dug into the node modules, I could find it eventually.
Obviously, the serve's not going to work.
You don't want to serve it. You would just build it and tell it
I'm
where
not
to
gonna-
serve from.
I'm going to do that. Do that.
It'll build to that _site directory by default, which is configured in an 11t.js file, which is at the top level. A .11t.js. It's right below index if you want to look at it. Right, so here it tells you, you tell it, I want to copy the CSS, JS, and images directly as is.
That would be awesome.
You're in one application going to another.
Into a browser-based application. I don't think that worked.
Just to inject, I think what you're going to have to end up doing is configuring rollup to support 11t. I've never seen 11t before, but if you see that now.prebuild.mjs, that
Right.
file gets run. So if you're in IDE, there's no like node environment, which is why all those scripts are yellowed out there saying these are never going to run. Yeah.
That makes
Desktop
sense.
scenario, like do whatever you want, right?
Yep, that
But
makes sense.
there's-
Once you build it, though, you could just upload those files. So like from that site folder locally, you could just copy the HTML into an HTML file.
I
But
just
what
don't
our
like the structure.
client build's going to do is run that now prebuild.mjs file. So you can configure that rollup settings in there to support 11t.
What
Oh,
file
okay.
now? Oh, I see now prebuilt MJS. Can you open it up real quick on the left there, Chris? At the bottom, that now prebuilt MJS file. So this
So
is
if you need-
importing ServiceNow front end plugins, glop, and then rollup, or glob and then rollup. Yep.
So if you need to make rollup changes to support whatever UI system you're doing, this would be where you do it.
I see.
Yeah,
Hey,
we don't have a lot of
I love the
documentation
fact
on
that you
this.
put this in.
I'm not as familiar with rollup as I'm not familiar with any of those kinds of ES build rollup or Vite things to do these kind of pre-built stuff. But I'll have to look into this.
For what you're trying to do right now. If you can get rollup to support 11t, you should be able to configure it in there to do it.
I suppose what you could do, Chris, is you could copy the now pre-built MJS file and ask Cursor to modify to support 11t.
I just asked it to change your app into React and see what happens.
Well, you could have it do that. There's not a whole lot to it. All the code is pretty clear.
I mean, it has changed so much of the boilerplate. It has made making quality code and writing tests so much easier and less painful. Yeah.
I'm afraid that I'll forget some of the stuff that I've had to learn over the years.
But I've forgotten most of it anyway. like
Well,
I have to go search Google half the time. Like,
I
how do I
wonder
define this?
how important it is. Is this me wondering how important it was to carry a calculator with me? And but when I was a baby, or like when my parents were young children, if their parents felt the same way about calculators being brought into schools, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Or word processors, like when I was a kid, my parents going to school, I'm guessing. Or like,
You know,
yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the AI part of this. It really shouldn't have to do a whole bunch of modification to these JavaScript files. It really should be pretty compartmentalized.
we don't have to wait for. I don't know if we want to like talk about anything else or not. I'm not saying we're gonna focus on that necessarily. I just thought it would be an interesting thing to do.
So
Okay. Yeah.
when I was going through this, at the end of it, I had a thing working. Not this app. I had something else working. I was working on a globally scoped app that obviously doesn't work with this. So I'm like, screw it. I'll just make a new scoped app and I'll bring everything over manually. And I did that stuff. But at the end of it, I was like, does this make it better for me? I mean, I guess I can do better file diffs. But I didn't see a lot of personal benefit in that use case. And so I was trying to understand, like, who benefits most from this? I'm like, well, store app builders definitely benefit from this because it gives them a very clear place to build. But if you're not a store app builder, you're a customer or you're somebody who's working in global and wherever else, like as a consultant partner, I don't know if this is something I'd recommend to most folks.
It's a shift in thinking, and I think that long term it's going to be an extremely useful thing. There's an aspect of ServiceNow maintenance that I have noticed, and it's always bothered me. It's production drift. You eventually, everyone knows you need to clone down, right? Oh, well, we got to clone down. We got to clone down. We got to clone down because you have production drift. And so it's at some point, because you don't clone down all your data, right? Most people don't, they'll do a subset of data and things like that. So that's not why you're cloning. You're cloning because for some reason, your production instance is not the same as your other instances. And so in light of that, approval required. Sure. It's a VM. I don't care. But I think that long term, like the idea of doing an implementation, especially once global is supported here or global scoped apps, but even without, like if most of my implementation is, and anything I need to create or anything that is mine is in scoped apps that I can maintain in a Git repository using CI/CD, because now that gives me an out-of-the-box solution, a GitHub simple based solution where I can push my code to Git, have it auto build within a Docker image on GitHub, and then push that to my QA instance automatically, and then run tests, which is exactly what I'm setting up right now. But if you scale that up, all of a sudden now, if my source of truth is not the instance, it's outside of the instance,
Right.
then that production drift becomes less of a problem. Now, obviously, this is a long-term view on this, and it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But I foresee that it will be a huge boon to people eventually who are adopting ServiceNow as this platform large scale. Because if I can then do these things and make sure that, hey, if I need my vulnerability response configuration spun up so I can do a test over here, or I'm doing an upgrade and I want to run a test in my sandbox. And now all of a sudden I've got to just run a Git workflow that's going to go install my most recent stuff because I haven't maintained my sandbox in forever. I have a little tool out here. If I can type. Call it the SDK extension. But originally this just started off as I wanted to be able to run server-side scripts remotely. Because I think if I can set up an app using scripts background, like setting properties and things like that, then I can do that automatically. So I can just run an NPM script, and now all of a sudden XYZ is my app is set up and things like that. But now, based off what we were just talking about, I've also added the ability to install application files and plugins. I define a JSON file within my application with all of the dependencies, and I can just run a script and it will sit there and install that on the instance. So
Sure.
now my sandbox that I never maintained, I can just run this and make sure everything is up to date to the most recent version. Or if I spin up a PDI, and this is something I do every other day, I spin up a PDI, run this real quick against it so all of my apps are installed that I need to run my application, then automatically installs my application, then runs a setup script to set all of my tokens and authorization and endpoint, because I do mostly integrations and all that stuff. So it helps me along those lines of quality application development on the platform and maintaining those things. So I'll get that out if anyone wants to try it out. It's still in alpha, it's still very early, but we use it pretty much every day. So it works overall. And like I said, you can say, I want to run this in global, I want to run this in a particular scoped app. That I've found is really nice. Edwin and I were working years ago on a project like this because we needed to do some performance testing on different instances and whatnot. And moving to the consulting side, I will agree. And here's something that we haven't talked about. ES modules. So there's a new table, within ServiceNow called sys module.
And it's not search by code search by default.
Say again?
I don't believe.
What'd you say?
I don't think it's search by code search by default either.
I don't
So
think
if
so.
you're
No.
so if you're importing stuff, it's like a secret place.
And I don't know if there's been discussions about this changing, so don't quote me on it. Oh, now there's private definitions on them, so that could be what they're doing now, but they're not editable within the instance. So you can only push them from IDE or from local. And this is something that the reason I'm touching on this is talking about consulting. Like I said, these are not editable from within the instance. So that means all of a sudden now we have to be, if we're in consulting, we have to be traditional software development consultants. And so like people have been doing software consulting for decades, right? And they've had to turn over source code and things like that. That's just how it's always been. We in ServiceNow never had to deal with that because everything was just in the instance. And when we roll off, we just roll off and we're done. So now in this case, there's going to be a curve there of saying, okay, well, where am I going to store that particular code that gets built into those sys modules? And that's one of the reasons why I love the fact that they have done the now.include thing. So what I usually do is I'll add another folder here called includes. I'll add a folder, script include. I already added one here with my script. There is a newer API, so now you can see where to go. I have to admit, the docs on this are pretty decent for the API stuff. For getting set up and whatnot, it's tough because of the node setup and all of that stuff. But when it comes to Fluent, the docs have been updated quite well. And then that on top of the stuff that is kept in GitHub is a pretty good reference. But you can just type, what I always type is ServiceNow SDK. It is a little weird in the left-hand menu. That's the only thing I'll tell you about that. Like if you navigate away from ServiceNow SDK, it's kind of hard to find it again in the left hand. Like right now it shows up, but then if I go back up here, then it kind of disappears. I believe it's under reference, or you can just search for Fluent API reference. So I'm going to look for, because normally I've just been doing the record API that I mentioned, but now there's actually a script include API.
Do you know when that got added?
This was, I think, just added because in 4.0, the entire backend was rebuilt for SDK for the plug. They call these plugins, at least up to right now. And so that entire thing was updated. So that way it makes it easier for the rest of the ServiceNow teams to be able to create for the UI builder team, for the flow designer team, all that stuff. It's easier for them to create it. Now, within here, this isn't a kind of a cool part. I don't have to worry about creating my sysid. I just copied this in, but when I do a build, it'll auto-generate a key for this and auto-generate the sysid.
D is kind of confusing to me because it's like, okay, here I can give it a string. So now I have to come up with like a random string for it. And that's fine.
Have a sysid there. Like if you have
Right.
like if you have something that's old or that you've converted or whatnot, it'll have a static sysid there. But then if I want to not have to worry about generating a sysid, I can do this. And then now.include, so I'll do // It would be awesome to have code completion here.
Yeah, that's hard in a string though. Ask, you'll never get it. So-
Exactly. Now, here's another thing. You don't have to use prototype anymore. So you don't have to do class.create and all that stuff. That was defined back in 2004 before JavaScript had the concept of any type of a class, which came out in ES6 and now we're in ES 2021. So obviously, anyway. But yeah, so what we were talking about earlier, the includes, basically what it's going to do is it's just going to do a string replace and it's going to grab this server.js file from there and just plonk it in here.
Yeah, when I saw the scope stuff, I was like, I wonder if there's a way I can use a variable in that string. But at the same time, it's like there's other places that your scope is defined. I don't think you can concatenate strings in that JSON structure. I think it gives an error.
Oh, that's fair.
Right. So then you'd have to build a file or function to like figure out what your scope is and then append it with your name, but you don't have the name. You know what I mean? It feels like a lot of code that you don't need, but I don't know how to deal with it better.
I agree. So my reason for building this out, talking about consulting and all of that stuff. So for now, until ServiceNow consultants are used to, asking when you start your engagement, all right, do you have a Git repository that you would like us to use or a Git server, et cetera, or how would you like code to be turned over, things like that, which will eventually have to be part of that or could be part of that discussion. Using the includes is another option. It's still just a script include in the end, but it gives me a JS file here that I can now do a get time to watch that video. Like I've set up a testing framework that can actually test script includes and you can import those and it'll do mocking, all that stuff. And so like you can test them, you can compare them. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And then taking this a step farther and using TypeScript here, because then not in here, not in this script include, but in these server files, I've got a TS config right here. So I could type.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
I know people who love TypeScript. I'm not a fan of TypeScript. People love their types, and I can just be different, and that's okay.
I can tell you right now that moving to types, like for any large scale application, if you're building like the scripts that I saw you had over here.
Yeah, that thing is a tiny thing.
And that's what JavaScript is great for. But the problem is JavaScript has been taken into this world of enterprise applications. And now like, okay, well, what happens when I pass the wrong thing or when something is null and it's not supposed to be null?
But you can just code defensively if it's a really important attribute or variable.
You could type checking.
We could just agree to disagree. It's not important or not important.
And that's fine.
I did a whole bunch of TypeScript stuff when I was working on some Redwood.js projects. And it was very interesting. But I felt like I spent a lot of time writing out those type definitions. This object will be in this form. This form will have these types. These types will have this array. I might occasionally have this thing be an error. Now I have to like weirdly join these two types of objects. I'm not a fan. To me, that feels like work for the sake of work.
Like I said, on larger scale stuff, like when I make a change and I've got, 2 million lines of code across the application, it's nice being able to run build and it tell me, hey, you screwed up here.
Yeah, failing
but I
fast
get
is
it.
important, and TypeScript definitely lets you know when you fail ahead of time. But to
Yes.
get it set up, it's a lot of work to set that up and a lot of work to maintain it.
I came from C++, C Sharp, and Java. And to me, that's just natural. And also with code completion now and everything, it's so fast. Like I don't even usually have to finish 5 lines and it completes my thought for me. You can do this. And so
Yep.
now I've got one step more of having this type of development experience within my application. And then also being able to test those as well through Jest or whatever testing framework you happen to use.
Right.
If they're in here, they don't have to be TypeScript files, obviously.
They can be
Th- this-
JavaScript files, obviously.
yeah,
The
yeah.
only
So
thing
it can
with
be,
TypeScript is the when I was calling the glue files, I don't know if they have an actual name, but it's where the declarations of the ServiceNow plugins are.
the plugins. Yep. Well, in this case, this is literally just my script file that could go directly or it could get built. So you do have to change a couple of things in the build process, which I'm guessing IDE does automatically for me since it's not actually doing these. Locally, when I run build, I've got to run TSC and all that stuff for TypeScript. But otherwise, yeah, it'll just grab my JS file and stick it into that sysmodules folder. And so it
Right.
gives me that as well.
Yeah, if folks are jumping into this and they're not used to TypeScript, definitely don't go down that path right away. That is a deep hole. For folks that aren't familiar with typed languages and dealing with the interface types and
That's
all
fair.
that other
That's fair.
shenanigans, it took me a while to get through that stuff when I was learning it outside of ServiceNow. So I'm just like, reduce your overhead as much as you can to get in there.
So there's just one thing that I wanted to talk about. Whether you're writing JavaScript or TypeScript, if you do write a sys module, there's a magic thing that exists within modules. And it's not really magic, it's a proxy. But if I'm writing in a module in JavaScript or in TypeScript, I need to import my glide record or I need to import my objects, my classes, right? Well, in sys modules, that is written in a separate runtime within the platform. And so there needs to be a bridge between the Rhino script traditional runtime and we call it ES module land on my day-to-day. And so if I did it right, it's a named import.
Is it from the ServiceNow core, I'm guessing, or Glide?
This right here, this is a magic import. So
Okay.
you notice some of those others were there too from the dependencies and stuff like that. But
Right.
this right here is a magic name that basically allows you to jump that gap into Rhino land.
Can we not look at it in node modules?
You can, well, you might not be able to, or it may not matter. Let me put it that way. So my reason for saying that is I have rebuilt it. So there is ServiceNow Glide, but it's just a bunch of type definitions for TypeScript.
Right.
These
Starting
are
with
not
the G for
actual.
Glide. Is there one for Glide record that you just picked on that everybody's more familiar with?
Yeah. So Glide record is empty.js. But
But it points to the source map of this, and this has all the different attributes.
but no implementation.
Right.
Because of the fact that realistically, this is just for TypeScript. And that's also the same way you access other scopes. So let's say I want to access just one off the top of my head.
Glide record implementation.
I'm going to have to look at that.
I mean, I know that they're different.
So basically you just tack on the scope name. And that allows you to pull from other scopes.
Right.
Okay. So this is important. It's important for JavaScript files. It's important and a little frustrating for TypeScript files. So this is where your hate for TypeScript comes in handy. Because if you notice this right now, there's a lot of them are in here already, but some of them aren't. The namespaces are in here. but a lot of the scopes aren't in here.
Like your vulnerability one. Yeah.
So there are no, so if I go look at that node modules, there is no SN vol in there. And so for that reason, I decompiled that TypeScript library into definitions and rebuilt it. So now you can go in and add. So anyone who wants to pull this here, this is up public, you can add whatever you need to add to it. Now, there are ways to do it in TypeScript that are defined within the documentation, and those work for one-offs and just great. But if you're building an application that is a little bit larger or with multiple scoped apps and things like that, it just becomes a little bit of a hassle. So if anyone's building and wants to use that, they're welcome to. I've got some information.
Do you have that auto building as new stuff comes out somehow? Because that would be magical, but I don't.
I'm working on that right now, actually. So I've got a number of different things. Since you and I started talking about this, this is not ready by any means. But so I talked about this one in that other video, the mocking library. From our conversations, I'm like, I wonder if I could come up with some options for setting up the projects here. And so I started this. Basically, it's a how to get started. It's got a number of different project setups for Mac OS, Linux, Windows, PowerShell, updating package dependencies. So this will update the dependencies after you've created an app to make sure that certain things are installed in the dependencies. You're welcome to look through it. But again, this isn't quite ready yet. I wanted it to have it ready by today, but life, as you mentioned, we get busy.
No, I learned the bus is great. I don't have anything else to add here.
Do you prefer NVM over NodeEnd?
Do I prefer NVM over NodeEnd?
Node NV or Node ENV is just another node version manager kind of thing.
I actually haven't heard of that one yet.
Oh.
I've always used NVM.
Okay. I'll update. I've seen them both. I've used them both.
I would use whichever one is more popular.
I'm not sure either one is. I think they're both about like...
Use GitHub stars to make that decision.
Okay. I'm trying to set up some of these projects to make it a little bit easier to get started. And then also this will auto import the mocking library, the ServiceNow Glide library if you want it, things like that. So that way you can run those and you're ready to go.
Oh, this is good. Just because if we share this video, I just want to just recap it. So like if somebody was like, oh, hey, what'd you guys talk about? You could open that, you could prefix this with like if you don't watch the whole thing, jump to the last 5 minutes. We'll just kind of recap what we did and what we learned and all these other things. So effectively, if you want to get into ServiceNow Pro Code stuff for this new SDK, unless you're deep in the weeds of it, you have virtual machines, you know all the ins and outs of spinning and stuff up, it might be easier to start with the ServiceNow IDE plugin, which you can install on the ServiceNow store on PDIs or your work instance if your work is okay with that. Additionally, if you want to bring in stuff that's more for front-end folks, right now the pre-built examples include Vue.js and React. And if you want to include other stuff, you will need to become familiar with rollup and modify the now something.mjs at the top level, which is fantastic. You can't run any node scripts in the IDE on the instance. If you want to do that, you'll need to install that on your local machine. And Chris is working on a bunch of libraries to help do these things faster.
Absolutely. We do have one or two questions from Reese. Great questions. He said, thoughts on Fluent Git repos versus XML Git repos, or even using both? I'm going to alter your question a little bit because I pulled up the demo SDK app that I built before, and you can see that there's a metadata directory that has XML in it, and it has stuff in Fluent. And you absolutely can do them both, which is nice with the SDK. So I would say, to me, if I have the option, I want to be moving to Fluent as much as possible versus XML, mainly because if you're using Git with XML, you will get a lot of fluff when you do a transform. And by fluff, I mean you'll get dates change. So all of a sudden you'll get a source file that is changed just because the date changed. And so you don't know that it actually changed. So now you've got to go through and search through it to see that it was just the date change. Sometimes it's not a huge deal. Sometimes it is. It just depends. The hub flows When those come out, Fluent will be amazing because that is a huge file that ends up getting created with XML, and there's tons of dates in there. And I've noticed those change every time I do a transform.
I mean, I'm gonna be so excited when I see sys choice list added as a type and any of the other weird things that just do a bunch of extra stuff around it.
Choice lists are already in here.
Right, but also like form views.
Form
Like,
views are in
just-
there.
I'm just saying, like, I believe you. I haven't done
Yeah.
to it, but if you could see that native in platform, like to compare these things, that would be amazing.
No, I completely agree. And
Just comparing those options when somebody added one, but it put it in the middle and then rearranged it. You can't do a diff on that easily to
No,
see what's
no.
changed.
or even worse, like the sys IDs of a sys dictionary record are not necessarily
Unsurprised.
static. And so I would say that, but Reese, I'm wondering if you're actually asking, do SDK Git repos versus the old school Studio Git repos? And I would say I never bothered using the old ones unless I was just backing up an app. It was so much of a pain that it wasn't even worth it, to me at least, once you got an app that was larger than 20 files. In my 2 cents, I would literally, even if I wanted to keep everything as XML, I would still use the SDK just to pull my app and store it in Git, just because it's easier. And since the SDK is doing the pull every time, it will usually try to keep things even in the XML files, in order. Thoughts on maintaining an app where some devs are using Fluent and some aren't. So kind of the same thing. If I updated this app with changes to this to-do XML, this particular file, it would update that XML file. So someone could be working in my instance doing work on that. And then when I pulled that, or when I synced it with the IDE, it would update the XML. And so I could write Fluent on the script includes and things like that. I've got some apps in my day-to-day that are 90% XML still, but I've just moved my script includes and things like that. That way, when we make changes to them, we more easily can see what those changes are and compare them over time. So it's gotten really nice to be able to progressively adopt Fluent if you want to do certain types and not other certain types.
Really important that folks using Fluent do a poll before they start
Yes.
doing work in it. If they don't do that poll, they won't get the most recent stuff in the instance.
Yes. So you do need to do a transform or a pull every time, periodically or whatnot. But that's one of the other things that's a big change in development process too. It wasn't a big shift for me just because when I was at ServiceNow, we kind of had to do the same thing. By the way, if you started at ServiceNow like back in before 2020 and we're doing platform development, you had to make an edit in the UI and then go to an unloads folder, and then a file would get created there. You had to copy it and then put it into a plugin and then reinstall the plugin and see if your file got loaded. It was a pain. But anyway, now I don't remember what I was going to say.
We're talking about maintaining the app in Fluent versus the app. And I think it doesn't, as long as you have the right strategies in place, it shouldn't be a
The
problem.
transform. Basically, you want to do incremental updates. So even in the instance, if I'm going to make changes, I'm not going to do 50 different things in the instance and then pull all of them down. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this thing, do that, do a transform, do a commit, do the next thing. And it's a very different mindset of incrementally developing my app and having those commits. But then over time, right now, we don't think that that's a big deal. But over time, I'll tell you, it's really cool to be able to see the incremental updates that you've made to an application over time and being able to go back to a version saying, hey, I screwed up and I need to go back. So, Jace, let me know if you're able to kind of get some of this working, or if you convert some of this.
I think it's
But,
much easier just to convert the MJS file to handle 11T, because I'm sure other people have done it already. I'll mess with it later.
Thank you all for joining us. Jace, thanks for the conversation, man.
Appreciate having me.
Have a wonderful Tuesday. Take care, everyone.